Hi, I'm Dr. Andrea Stover, licensed marriage and family therapist, and you're listening to the Modern Day Romantic Podcast. Welcome to the first inaugural episode of the Modern Day Romantic Podcast. This podcast has been a brainchild of mine for the past 6 years or so. So I am beyond thrilled, and it's long overdue in my mind to be delivering this. So I'm grateful for the opportunity that the timing's finally right to do this. And I'm really hoping that my message will be clear throughout this first episode and with episodes to come as to what exactly my aim is for this podcast. So I think to start with, I just wanted to throw out this question, what is a romantic? Obviously, the name of the podcast is The Modern Day Romantic. So what is a romantic? Well, to me, a romantic is someone who really carries the ideals of hope, beauty, love, all things good. There's just this sunny disposition and or a sense that there's a meaning, there's a meaningfulness to experience, particularly in the way I'm going to talk about it in romantic relationships. So sometimes with a romantic, they get called like a hopeless romantic. And I really think that the reframe for that is a hopeful romantic. So someone who maybe is looking for love, maybe has gone through a lot of experiences kind of seeking something beyond what they have found. I think there's a lot of yearning, pining away, longing that goes into deeper layers of what the romantic really is all about. Let me give an example. So as a marriage and family therapist, as a person who studied transpersonal psychology, psychoanalytic theory, I think there's always more than what meets the eye with any experience. So when we take the case of a romantic, there's a couple different qualities I really want to highlight just in this first episode. One of them being a real naivete, a optimistic, enthusiastic a dreamer. And I think when one presents to the world as this, sometimes the world doesn't take to that too kindly. For example, someone might scoff at the idea or act like it's juvenile in some way to, oh, you still believe that type of stuff? Oh, just kind of wait until you have a few more years on you or something like that. So I think that there's vulnerability, in other words, this one component, one facet that I'm talking about, of really presenting with a purity, an innocence, perhaps a naivete, but truly it's beautiful to me to be able to have that, again, like that sense of the ideal, let's put it in those terms, the ideal of everything that a relationship can be. So there's a lot of seeing the potential. There's a lot of wanting to invest for the sake of something that could be developed or cultivated through the relationship or connection with another. Another facet to the romantic, I believe, like more of an undercurrent to it, is that longing, yearning, and pining. And what is that? Well, that might be some of that hopeful, hopeless opposition there, the tension between those two, because it's really a yearning for love. It's a yearning for transcendence. I think sometimes it's a not liking to live in the mundane, the day to day. They want a little pizzazz. They want some glitter, some type of. So this is kind of one of the things I wanted to segue into is, okay, so if underneath the romantic is that pining, yearning, longing, it's coming from a place of lack. at times. It's coming from a place of what didn't get to be experienced. Maybe there wasn't enough love in the home growing up. Maybe it was through other relational experiences. There's something about seeking to fill that which is hungry for something it didn't get. Now, I think one of the transcendent, transpersonal dimensions of this is I also think it can be a quest, like almost a spiritual hunger, let's say, a soulful yearning. This is something that goes beyond the personal. This goes into the realm of the divine. And I don't mean to turn this into any type of conversation about this belief system versus that belief system. I mean this more from a psychological, archetypal place, which is to feel like you belong to something or are connected to something bigger than yourself. And it's really that sense of coming into union. And that's what happens with union is one kind of gives oneself over to something, someone, in order to be expanded, in order to become more than what one could be simply on one's own. So these are some of the facets of what I see a romantic to be. So to reiterate, there's the hopeful part, the part that is profoundly resilient, the part that is always seeking the good, believing that there is more than, no one and no thing is a lost cause. And I think that to me is heart-centered living. What I think the other side of that is that longing and yearning, so that lack that I was describing. This is where it can get very tricky because in order to be a healthy romantic, one has to be in contact with themselves. You have to have real intimacy. I love to break down this word intimacy as into me see. So intimacy with oneself, to know who you are as the romantic, just as much as getting to know who the other is that you're projecting that divine quality onto. And I think for those who have a natural proclivity to seek union, to seek transcendence, to seek merging and fusion, even, because that's what that is too, with another. So this focus on relationship can get dangerous and dicey because you're bypassing the self that you are in order to try to make yourself into something bigger, right? Like this projection, this divine transcendence that's going to come through this relationship with someone, or the idea or the ideal of this. And what this, to me, the dangerous and dicey part is that if you lose touch with yourself, with your own center, and I don't mean like momentarily, like those juicy moments, those amazing experiences that you can have, not just with people, but you can have it in life, where those moments that's, you're out in nature and everything is just so bright and beautiful, or everything is peaceful and calm, or it all is as it should be. Like those moments of satiation, they feel really satisfying. Those are amazing. And I'm not pathologizing those by any means. What I think, though, is when we're seeking to escape ourselves through relationship with someone else, that's where we can almost get lost, get lost in the other, get lost in the forest, not quite know where we're going, not quite sure what's happening to us. And really, there's a surrender of one's own will at that point. So there's a lot of ways I want to get into this. Probably each of these things will be an episode unto themselves. But one thing I think really worth considering now, just because I know this is such a a topic that comes up around relationships, and this kind of ties in this modern day aspect, is this idea of the narcissist and the empath. So, people that end up in this pattern with one another. And I don't want to play into those stereotypes too much. And I'm definitely not using those words as like any type of clinical diagnosis with that. What I want to say about those things is, to me, relationships in general are all about self and self in relation to another self. And what can happen in a polarization at times is, if there's too little of focus on oneself, you're going to project yourself onto the other. And oftentimes, so that's kind of like that empathic, thin boundaried person that maybe has a hard time figuring out where they land or where they stand on certain things. And they're seeking to fulfill and complete themselves through their relationship with the other. Okay, well, what would you be looking for? The opposite of you then, right? Someone who has maybe an overly developed sense of ego, self, individualism. And I think so that's a piece of that polarity, which is this term that's so flippantly used now, like narcissist. I think what people are trying to say with that is someone who seems more preoccupied with themselves than with anyone else, and that they don't feel to have a lot of empathy for how others might feel, or and really a tolerance of difference too, being able to respect the autonomy and individuality of other individuals who are different from them. So I wanted to bring this one example in to kind of start to put some frame, some structure, some form to the complexity, I really think, of this idea of being a romantic. That how beautiful and wonderful it is to be a romantic, and kind of that dangerous, dicey place of looking to complete yourself in an unhealthy way by bypassing being a self and developing the self in order to focus on another and derive self from that person. Okay, so I say all of that because my intention with this podcast is to talk about the complexity and also preserve the integrity of what it means to be a romantic. Why I think that's so incredibly important, especially now more than ever before, is relationships today are they're undergoing a transformation, which is great. I guess. Wonderful. Okay. It just is what it is, right? I shouldn't say great. It's not terrible. It's not great. It's undergoing change. And with that, we need to be able to adapt and flex to the times we're in, while also being able to stop, think, question, consider what might be some of the consequences, or in other words, what might be some of the shadow qualities that may be going on without our conscious awareness. There's always a shadow. I study a lot of Carl Jung's work, and the shadow is a really important, not just theoretical consideration, but experience. It's an experience. We all have parts of ourselves that are unconscious to us. And that happens on the individual level. It happens on a societal level. It happens on a collective level. And so if we can't, I'm not trying to say we need to not be in life and not be kind of living in and with and through the times right now. But if we could just maintain a bit of consciousness, just a bit of that observer, that inner witness as to what's going on right now, what shift, and for anyone who's listening that's been around for, let's say, a few decades, to really reflect on what you have seen and what you've noticed in relationships around you, in society's messages around relationships, and maybe even your own. How have your own beliefs, ideas, desires, preferences, around what a relationship is and what it means to you changed through time. Maybe it hasn't. Maybe it's stayed pretty consistent for you, and so be it then. That's totally fine. But it's really important to me to be able to preserve these virtues of a romantic in its purest form, because I think there's some real wisdom there, regardless of how naive it may look to others. Romantics live from the heart, and they're alive. They feel, they're feelers. And I think one of the things that is really upsetting, at least for me, is the amount of people that seem to not be able to feel. They seem to not be able to feel. And I'm not saying that's any fault of anyone's. It's what we do to one another. This is what we're doing to one another, is we're wounding by ghosting people, or by, getting caught up in collective movements of you do you, you do you. It's like, and I'll do me. Maybe what people are trying to say is, I don't want to be in codependency anymore. I want to do this in a different way. I've lost myself, or I'm trying to develop myself. But I sometimes wonder if people realize that they're talking to other people, people that are also vulnerable, people that have sensitivities. And I think that there has not been as much mindfulness around, for some. Everything I say on here, by the way, is all has context with it and needs context. But in general, those who can't feel their heart. There are romantics out there, beautiful souls, beautiful people that aren't able to access themselves due to overgiving, overdoing, overbeing, putting their faith in the wrong person, investing in the wrong way, we'll say. And it's soul crushing. It's heartbreaking. It's devastating. So I want this space to be for people who identify as being a romantic, even if you've kind of lost your center in that, people that are looking to come back online in their hearts. I think this is so important. I also wanted to say part of the modern day piece of all of this is that real sense of, what is technology doing to us? How has that taken away some of the humane treatment, the way that we engage with one another? Like I said, the ghosting, for example, being ghosted. It's basically killing someone off, is what that's doing. It's killing someone off. And I'm not saying that there's not a time and a place to, because that's the other side of having like cell phones and technology is, think about days prior to that where you went on a date with someone, let's say, and you would either have to call them on the phone to follow up with them, or wait to see them in public again at some point, or write a letter. And with this instantaneous access, sometimes it's maybe you want to set a boundary. Maybe you want to say, no, I don't really want that person in my life. Or I just want this podcast to be a place where we can ask these questions. I'm not trying to tell anyone how to be, or just to be considerate of these things. There's always a reason for, and there's always a reason to not, and everything in between. But to truly, sit with people as a therapist, sit with people and hear and watch how the toll it takes on one's psyche, on one's heart, to put themselves out there, to go on date after date after date after date, and to have it seem like, oh, hey, maybe, and then just, being ghosted, or not considered as a human. Okay, I've probably said enough about all of that, but those are just a couple examples. This podcast is also for people who are in committed relationships just as much as people who are single and looking for love. So I want to say that too. The examples I've given so far maybe have been or sounded more like those who are single and dating, but I think all of this rings true and holds true for those who are also partnered in longer term committed relationships, whether that be legalized marriage, formal marriage, or some type of, verbal commitment to another person. I think in part, the other piece that I want to say around that for today's episode is this bigger question around what is the purpose of marriage? What is the purpose of being in a long-term committed partnership in today's society? How do we see that as having value? There's obviously been the old traditional ways, which is you meet someone, you get married, you theoretically spend the rest of your life with that person, case closed. That's the end. Well, I do know, based on divorce statistics, that is not really working for half of the population who did get married or is married. And so that leads me to ask questions. What's going on here? And back to kind of these shifts and maybe what's these times that we're in. They're deconstructing old traditions, old values, but in service to what? Well, a new way, I would guess, but what is it we're also deconstructing or destroying along the way? Is there anything of the old that could be carried forward that is needed to be carried forward in order for people to have satisfying, meaningful, connective relationships with other people, intimate partnerships? Some of what I would love to get into in a little bit of today's episode, but more so in future episodes, is, are divorces occurring because people become disillusioned by what they thought marriage was going to be versus what it actually was experienced to be? So what they fantasized, what they romanticized, what they dreamed it would be, compared to the actuality, the reality of it. And if that's the case, then we can really make a case for, again, those romantic ideals. It often strikes me with Disney movies, for example. And I think they're changing a bit today, but in the fairy tales, they usually end at the beginning. They end with the marriage. And what a disservice, because they're not really showing us what happens when Cinderella and Prince Charming ride off into the sunset, And I wonder about us and our kind of American society and cultural values. If we're getting married in order to plan a wedding, in order to check a box, in order to feel like, well, this is kind of what is expected of me. And not to say, I'm not saying that people don't get married for love. Of course, I would hope that's sprinkled in there too. What I'm really trying to bring up is this deeper question around what is marriage and what is the purpose of marriage? What is a way that would allow for it to be relevant? How can we look at it to in a way that feels more aligned, or like that the idea of it, I guess, and the experience of it are more congruent as opposed to discordant? So, for example, I would say one of the purposes of a long-term committed partnership, whether that is legal marriage or not, is to grow. I think it's difficult to grow in isolation. I think we need others, and I think we need the constancy of another to really get in there and do some of that work. Now, I am not saying everyone should get married or have a long-term committed partnership. It's totally fine to choose to be single, to not be interested in that, to be in relationship with something or someone else in a different way. Thinking of people, for example, that would dedicate their life to a cause or dedicate their life to some type of religious path or something like that. Great. I mean, you're still in some type of a committed partnership or relationship in that way. And maybe that's the container that you need to work out and work through some of your own personal growth stuff. But ultimately, I do think that the long-term committed relationship, this is an offering that I'm suggesting. Maybe we could reframe it as, hey, are you willing to grow with me? Am I willing to grow with you? Are we willing to kind of see where this thing takes us? What am I projecting onto you? What are you supposed to be to me? What are you projecting onto me? Are you willing to withdraw your projection? Am I willing to withdraw my projection and own that as, nope, this is mine. I got to figure this out and you've got to figure yours out. And we'll do that together. And we'll do that, through kind of triggering each other probably. And we'll support each other in that. But we're not going to be too one-sided, thinking that you are my savior and, you are my life force. And without you, I would be nothing. And it's like, you are my purpose for existing. And all, like, you hear the romantic, right? Like these are some of the things we think about with being a romantic. At least I do. These are some of my stereotypes with it. And I think that, to grow and develop the idea of what it means to be a romantic, it would be to see the beauty in a relationship serving a larger purpose than simply, okay, you check a box for me, I check a box for you. You give me the dopamine feel goods and the oxytocin releases. And, we kind of do that for a few years and then it kind of falls flat. And then I think, oh no, am I in love with you anymore? Oh, I don't feel in love with you. And then I don't know that I can be with you and we'll just divorce or we'll break up. And then I'll just find my next, most perfect ideal person and whatnot. So I think part of being a romantic, I think part of being in a relationship is being mature enough to anticipate the disillusionment that will occur. Because as I said earlier, we are projecting a divine-like quality onto someone that is a human being, and they will not be able to live up to that. And they might in moments, but generally speaking, we've got to allow for that. We've got to allow for our own humanness and the humanness of the other. Okay, so I've kind of thrown out some ideas here, and I want to wrap up now, just to kind of summarize that a romantic to me has so many beautiful qualities and attributes and virtues that I want to do my part to at least validate those, to encourage those qualities and attributes. I think that is missing in not everyone or, in society per se, but I think to be able to feel love, to love and be loved, to grow to be able to love both self and the other and world. Those are the things that romantics can teach us, that are innate to them. And maybe there might need to be some type of resuscitation to your inner romantic or the romantics of others that you may know, because it's a dog-eat-dog world out there right now. So I'm hoping this space will be a safe place to explore questions and to do deeper dives into the layers that go into being a romantic and trying to figure out this crazy thing called a relationship. Yes, I say crazy because it's sort of, it just feels kind of chaotic out there right now. That's my assessment. That's my take. So thank you for listening, and I will look forward to future episodes. Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. If you're interested in learning about ways to work with me, head over to my website, themoderndayromantic.com. From there, you'll be able to contact me and learn a bit more about the customized intensives and retreats I offer both individuals and couples. You'll also be able to support future podcast production via Patreon. There are several membership levels to choose from, including the Beating Hearts Club, which gives you access to exclusive content every month. Thanks so much for your support, and I'll see you next episode.